One more? Would
Go
you like
ahead.
to? All right.
Is this mic work? Is it
That works.
working? Okay.
Ready? Just like you got this. Wait for me. I'll signal you with your vocals. Ready? This is recorded. 1, 2, 3, go.
These guys get That's good.
How we doing, guys? Building instead of our guest speaker this evening has been coming to Boy State since he first got the position that he has again. He's going to talk a little bit about that, having it and losing it and coming back. Secretary of State Dunlap served in the Maine House for 8 years, served on the Fisheries and Wildlife Committee like I did, eventually became House Chair like I did, and became Speaker Pro Tem in the legislature like I did. So I don't know if I got a shot at being Secretary of State someday like he did, probably not. But anyway, please give a warm Boy State welcome to the Honorable Matt Dunlap, Secretary of State.
very much, Mr. Jakes, the Honorable Paul Jakes. A real giant in the outdoors community and a giant in many ways. As a side note, your previous speaker, Colonel Mosher, and I lived about 3 doors down from each other in college, Hancock College, University of Maine. Very, very small world, and I'm always a little bit surprised after I come to Boise State how many of you guys go on to do big things and then come on later on to remind me that they were in the audience when I spoke at Boise State. It's going to be a little bit humble. The work that we get into and why we get into it, and Mr. James and I were talking about why we step forward and go into things like the legislature. I got to tell you a little bit about myself, because I don't assume that any of you even know very much about me. I'll tell you, when I first got elected Secretary of State, a lot of you don't know what the Secretary of State does. And the straight answer is we manage motor vehicles, elections, corporations, commissions, notaries, and archives. Every Secretary of State is a little bit different, but my sister called me after I got elected and said, "What's the Secretary of State actually do?" I said, "Well, Secretary of State, I answered the state phone and get the state coffee." "Oh, okay." So, you can't assume that everybody knows everything about who you are and what you do. So, I grew up in Bar Harbor, went to university, went to university, wound up in Old Town, and I was working in kitchens. I worked in food service for about 20 years. And one of the kitchens that I was working
No, keep on going, Matt. We'll get it right.
Then the lights go off. It's like, okay, go. Try it again.
No. JJ, come here. We got to just dim these down a little bit. Our apologies. To take a picture of you speaking, we needed sunlight, and we got
too much light. Blind everybody. On my forehead when I was about 14, and I never looked back after that. So, anyway, I'm working in a kitchen, and the demographics of commercial kitchens are a little bit rarefied. Commercial kitchens are where all the dreck of society goes because nobody else will hire them. So, somebody gets out of prison, they need a job, they want to wash some pots and pans, and I want to supervise. But, we also had a lot of college students who were up near the university, and they gave me all the students to supervise and said, "Dunlap, you just like it. You take care of it. Don't let us fool with these people at all." So I had a young lady that I was working with who actually had to leave school because she couldn't afford the last couple of installments of her school bill. And I thought, forget that. That's when you get the cup, okay? I thought, I'm an alumni. I should be doing something about this. I started going to work on it and talking to people and getting kicked from one administrative office to the other. Long story short, I wound up in the living room of a state representative. He and I became friends. Go hunting together, fishing together. I volunteered on his re-election campaign. Eventually, he said, "How would you like to be a state representative?" That's way over my head, brother. I'm a cook. And but you go to the legislature and you find a lot of cooks, a lot of housewives, a lot of small business owners. And every one of them probably has a story similar to mine. They had somebody who needed help with a problem. Mike Mishu wanted to work on water quality in the Penobscot River. He wasn't thinking about running for Congress, and now running for governor. Thinking about trying to help some people. And, the experience I've been through here the last few years has been a little bit unique. I'm the first person in 132 years to serve non-consecutive terms as Secretary of State. In Maine, the Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Treasurer are all elected by the legislature. And we're the only state that does it that way. We're one of the 3 states that elects the Secretary of State by ballot of the legislature. So, your job kind of depends on who's in the majority. And the Democrats have held control of the legislature in one iteration or the other for decades. And I was going into my last term. I was president of the National Association. I'm trying to, okay, what am I going to do next? I got a couple of years to figure this out. And then the election of 2010 hit. And I was looking for a job not 2 years, but 2 months. And when I mentioned Colonel Mosher living right next door to me in my dorm, this is a very, very small world, gentlemen. And there's an old saying that you have to be kind to people on the way up, because you're going to meet them on the way down. And once it became clear that I was going to be out of a job, I made a commitment to the institution of the Secretary of State that we were going to have the best and smoothest transition in the country. I felt committed to that. I care about that office. I care about the people that work there. And Charlie Summers was elected by the legislature to succeed me. Now remember, I'm president of the organization. I fly to Texas to address a group of all the new secretaries and welcome them to their office and introduce them to my successor. And I decided to do it upright. You know, we bring him in full time at his full salary. I made him a deputy secretary of state. Everything we did was joint press releases, joint speaking events, and I just felt it was right for the institution because it's a very complicated organization, very complex job, and I thought I owe it to this institution to make sure he's as ready as I can make him when he takes over. And we actually became pretty good friends through it all. So then I go off into the wilderness, which is a long story I'm not going to bore you with, but then, you know, I ran for U.S. Senate, lost the primary, but now I'm done. I got the hint, they don't want me anymore. And, hey, great run, 14 years, 8 in the House, 6 as Secretary of State. And, but I had some time on my hands, and I'm out on the campaign trail, talking to voters, telling candidates how to do it. I had a candidate who actually was a graduate of this institution, who called me up and said, you know, I'm having a really hard time asking people for those $5 matching checks for clean elections. I said, no. You got it all wrong. You're not asking them for money. If you're willing to step up and do something manifest that shows that you care about that community and you want to do something good, you're asking them to be a part of that effort. You're asking them to help themselves. And that's the way you have to think about it. You're not asking for money. $5. And they were quite successful in getting their checks. They didn't get elected, but you know, elections come and elections go. I can tell you that firsthand. You lose elections sometimes. As I was going through that work and having those conversations with people, the rumors started to swirl. What's he running for? Is he running for Secretary of State again? It's like, no, I'm not running for a damn thing. I'm done. But it kept coming up and coming up and coming up, and the fact that I had been nonpartisan in my work, a lot of them had a lot more appreciation for the work that I had done after I was out than they had when I was, you know, when I was in. So the Democrats take the legislation back over, and I get the calls, are you going to run? So I decide to do it. I get elected, and now the shoe's on the other foot. And I'll tell you what, Charlie Summers couldn't do enough for me. He was so grateful for the help that I had given him and showing him exactly what he was up against and giving him the full history of everything that we worked on in the 6 years I was secretary. It allowed him to be successful and also freed him up to run for U.S. Senate too, which he was ultimately unsuccessful with as well. But I had put in very, very qualified staff that were served at the pleasure of the Secretary of State, and they understood the landscape. That when the door closed and I was gone, they were probably gone too. But because Secretary Summers had a better understanding of what they did, he kept every one of them. Every one of those staff has stayed. A couple retired, some left on their own. But when I came back, my old staff was still there. And so now I'm able to go back to work, much the way I did before. And it's, like I said, it's a small town. We're always running into people that we never thought we'd see again. So you have to keep that in mind. It's been an interesting couple of years. One of the things, I've got a little bit of time here, and one of the things I like to do with this group is always have some Q&A. Because you guys are looking at this in some cases for the first time. I'm one of that strange subclass of people in public service that never had any inkling of ever wanting to do this. I was not in Boy State. I was not on the honor roll. I was not elected most likely to succeed. And I think I've made that okay. And I've learned a few things along the way. So is that enough of a little story there, Mr. Jakes?
If you're happy with it, Mr. Secretary.
Well, I mean, I'm a windbag. I could talk all night. I'm not sure they want to listen.
Well, we're trying to get the lights down a little bit so you don't get fried up there, but we didn't want to keep doing it while you were speaking.
It's fine.
Because that would be, well, most people would be upset by that, but not you, because I know you don't get upset about that stuff.
Now, don't worry about that stuff. Well, let's do a few questions, and I'm sure it'll lead into longer stories. Who wants to ask a question? Yes, right here.
A lot of the speakers that have been coming in have talked about how they've just kind of ended up in, you know, a high range position or like just ended up in the government. And what I'm wondering is, I haven't heard that a lot of them went to college for political science.
Oh, hell about political science. Okay? Far more an art than it is a science. Okay, now what's happening in Augusta right now, got everybody's mind, and Washington too. Washington is seized up like an old Mercury motor. It's just not working. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And it's a way people approach all the political science and how they approach it. Okay? And it's a little bit of a secret. I'm going to tell them the secret. Is that okay, Mr. Jakes?
Yes, sir.
What is the point of parliamentary procedure? What's the point of making those motions? Move the ought to pass report. What's the point of voting?
Gotta do it somewhere.
Got to do it somewhere. That's one thing. Non-chaos. Yes.
To have order.
To have order. Good, good. But if you're, to push what?
Your opinion.
To push your opinion. That's the way I want to look at it. Wrong! The point is to facilitate agreement. Facilitate agreement. And when you're looking at it in terms of what you can win. I can tell you how a bill becomes a law. That's easy. You read the little brochure, right? You write the bill, you put it in, and then it gets referred to a committee, and then you get them to vote for it, and then it gets first read, second reading, engrossment, enactment, same thing in the other chamber, and the government signs it, it's a law. But you gotta get people to work together. You have to get people to hear what you have to say and make your problem their problem. And that takes a lot of massaging and getting people to work together on interests. Yeah, you can have, how many lobster bills did you vote on, Representative James? Hundreds.
Hundreds.
How many lobsters in your district?
0.
Exactly. In fact,
This was my district, right here, Mr. Secretary, right where we are.
I walked into the State House the other day, and there were House members wandering all over the place, and I said out loud, gotta be a lobster bill. And yes, it was. 5 hours of debate. But it's really, really important to those people. And this is a state law, it's a state issue, whether you're in Fort Kent or in Port Clyde. The Port Clyde guys don't care about potato farm. They don't care about irrigation. They live on the ocean. But they have to work together. So the point is, facilitate agreements. The political science piece of that is important because if you can work with others and get along, it doesn't really matter what you reason. And that's one of the things that everybody says. That, you go to college, it doesn't matter what you study. You learn a discipline of learning. And that's why we encourage people to go on to higher education. You don't need it. Mike Bishop's living proof of that. You know, a member of Congress, 6 terms, high school education. But it doesn't hurt either. As an undergraduate at the University of Maine, I took 4 political science classes. And I think the transcript will show that I failed at least one of them. I never took a public administration class, said the guy that was public administrator of the year in 2008. And it's just, first of all, trust the people that, in terms of public administration, trusting people to work with you and not micromanage and not second guess, support the people around you. And as far as the legislative success I had, is finding ways to support others, things that are important to them, and have them support me as well. And understanding the rules of procedure and not overreaching when I thought I could win, and I didn't need to. And that's what I think has made this legislature fairly successful, is that they've been able to do that. They'll find agreement on a lot of things. They don't move on. It's a very good question. Others? Yes.
What did you do in the wilderness?
2 years, the Valley of Death. Well, it's interesting. I had my name in for a presidential appointment for the United States Election Assistance Commission, appointments that have still not been made. Things move very slowly in Washington. And I was on the board of directors of the Sportsmen's Alliance in Maine, the executive director of 18 years, retired. We hired somebody else who decided not to stick around, so they needed, coming in January's legislative session, they needed help, I needed work, so we came to an agreement. And I worked for the Sportsmen's Alliance in Maine as the executive director for much of 2011. And then, I saw the political landscape for what it was and realized that there was going to be a change happening in the U.S. Senate. Whether Senator Snowe wanted it or not, there was going to be a change. She's going to see a pretty serious challenge from the far right, and she's never had a primary before. I remember, you need support of your family to do this stuff. You just don't wake up one day and say, hey, I can run for U.S. Senate, let's go. I spent 4 months trying to talk myself out of doing this, as a matter of fact. But I remember the night I said to my wife, who's been very, very supportive. She stayed home with my daughter when I was serving the legislature. She supported us financially when legislative pay is not what a lot of people think it is. And I said to her, what do you think? Not theoretically, not maybe someday, but this year and now, running for the United States Senate. She got up and walked out of the room. Okay? I'm going to make a few phone calls here. There are a couple people I trust. And every one of them answered me in italics. Really? You want to do what? And then I talked to them, and then my wife comes back after a couple of weeks. I think you were talking about running for the U.S. Senate. I think that's a really, really bad idea. And she got her homework. Olympia Snowe is worth like $5 million. And she has $5 million in her campaign account. She's got $40 million in her checkbook. She's never lost an election. She's been in office since 1973. She won her last election with 75% of the vote. Could you find something a little harder? I say, well, imagine that you're the pilot of a German reconnaissance plane flying over the southeast of England in 1944, and you fly low enough to realize all those tanks are filled. It's not real. And there's a reason why she's talking about this. Because in all those years, she's never had a primary. Her husband has some legal problems. A poll came out and said 60% of Republicans want somebody more conservative than her. And we put all that together, it needs to be a little tricky for her. So I started putting together a campaign, and I ran for the U.S. Senate. And it went great first. And then she drops out, proving my point. I mean, she said about partisan gridlock. I tell you what, gentlemen, read the history. They've had partisan gridlock in Washington since 1789. Nothing to do about that. In fact, when Thomas Brackett Reed from Portland was the Speaker of the United States House, it took him 3 days in Congress to come to an agreement to adjourn. They couldn't adjourn for 3 days. So gridlock's nothing new. And of course, I said we have to take her at her word. She said because of partisan gridlock. But I think you saw the handwriting on the wall. The only way she could get out with any honor was to call her own shot and drop out. And the wheels came off. I spent 9 hours on the phone one day, raised $50, and we wanted to be involved. So then I lost the primary and then worked on House races and Senate races and got elected Secretary of State. Long couple of years. So the long journey to wind up in the exact same place I started from, the Secretary of State. So there you have it. That's the story. That's the wilderness. Thank you. Questions over here?
Does political science give you any distinctive bonus in the political field or not?
Well, I don't know, because I didn't study it. I can't say that. I can't put down the field of study. I mean, I think it's there is a lot that you can learn in political science that you can use as tools. And I don't mean like this type, the work I do now, but I mean in terms of things like polling, understanding how polling works. Polling is not polling. It's not like reading the Bangor Daily News or the Keynote Journal and says, well, today's poll says that 66% of people think that Pat Dunlap's a great guy, and 34 think he's an idiot. No, but polling can actually be a targeted way to identify constituent groups, identify where your weaknesses are, in an honest way that you can't get any other way. So you learn that through the study of political science, and you can't really learn that unless you're actually doing it. So it gives you a broader perspective. So I wouldn't discourage you from studying it. I didn't. I studied Roman history, which is, imagine my shock upon graduation to open up the newspaper, get the help on it. Nobody's asked me to name my own price as a Roman historian. So I wound up, like I say, pursuing a lucrative career in food service. But then I got a master's degree in English, modernist poetic structural theory, and that allowed me to become a bar manager and a supervising cook. But I learned a lot of great stuff, and I'll tell you, we spent a week on the title of a bill for a citizen initiative, agonizing over the word regarding versus restoring. And if anybody ever asks what you do with an English degree, that's what you do with an English degree. You try to get that stuff right. All right, another question down front here. Yes?
Do you feel that most people, if they felt that hub that you described to go into to run for office, would actually do so?
No, most people don't. I mean, it's not normal to run for public office. It's not normal. It's not normal to pick up the phone and call perfect strangers and ask them to give you money for your campaign. That's not normal. And for the time that we're 5 years old, the only thing that we really wanted in life is for other kids to like us. You want to get invited to the birthday party. You want to be in, the clubs. All right, you want to make varsity on the baseball team. It's the exact diametric opposite in politics. I have been accused of every sin in the calendar. I've had the flesh pulled from my bones. I don't know how many times. In fact, this has been very quiet for me. This is the longest I have gone as Secretary of State since January to June. And it used to be 3 times a week, by the way. But I have not either gotten a death threat or a major lawsuit thrown at me. And also, too, people read the paper about partisan politics and, some of the speculation now about congressional seats that may open up should Mike Bishop finish his pledge to run for governor. And my name's been thrown in. And one blogger wrote that I'm the Republicans' dream opponent because I lost to the relatively weak Cynthia Dill in primary, and I am uninteresting, unexciting, and increasingly unelectable. Do people really like reading that stuff about themselves in the paper? Yeah, not really. But the thing is, when you talk about the poll, okay, the poll, when I was weighing in my mind every day about whether or not I should run for U.S. Senate, I thought it was a possibility. I got a call one day, and Mr. Jakes, you can attest to this. I bet you get these calls at least 3 times a week. I don't know who else to call. Can you help me? I know you're not down there anymore, but we don't know who to turn to. And it's a fellow calls me. I've done some business with him when I was in the legislature. I don't even remember who it was. Hadn't talked with him in 15 years. We don't know who to turn to. And his mother was elderly. She had developed diabetes and got a letter from the Secretary of State. They're going to take away her driver's license, and she's very upset. I said, oh, this is easy. It's a CR-24. Okay, the doctor should be familiar with the form. They check mark. Up to date on medications. It's 1-800 da-da-da-da-da, extension 9181, and that's the fax number. They fax it there. Any questions, give me a call. I'll walk them through it. Calls me back half an hour later. I can't thank you enough. Period. And I thought, you know something? That's the shit I miss. I miss help. And for whatever I've done did for my daughter. Quite a bit. You ask people around Old Town, where I represented in the House, they couldn't name a single bill I sponsored. And I sponsored a couple hundred in the 8 years I was there. Chaired of Fish and Wildlife, and I sponsored plenty of those. They couldn't tell you any of the organizations I was part of, any of the honors I got, but they remember, they never forget what you did for their kid, what you did for their organization, what you did for them, or their mother. It's all about helping people. And, you know, when I was first in the legislature, and I mean, how many of you guys think that you might want to run for public office someday? Yeah, a fair number of you. Big enough number. I didn't think about that. My father is huge into politics, and I thought it was weird. I thought that was weird. And then I got recruited to run and get elected. Well, now it's something. I'm no longer just that cook. I'm the honorable Matt Dunlap. And I can tell now who the telemarketers are because they're looking for Johan. They get honorable mixed up with Johan. They're trying to make a name out of it. Johan? Who the hell's Johan? I was like, oh, the honorable. I get it now. So I get elected, and of course, when you're in your first term in the legislature, you're usually on the outside of the doors of the closed door meetings. So you have plenty of time in your hands wandering around. I always went to the State House all the time. Before, once as an honorary page, once in my middle school band, played the Star Spangled Banner, great band back there. And, you know, I was looking around the State House, and right by the House chamber, they have all these little 8x10 portraits, and I thought, oh, wow, speaking from every legislature, I one from Old Town. Very exciting, you know. And then I kind of breezed into the House chamber, and I looked up, and there's John Martin. John Martin, Speaker of the House for 18 years. I thought, oh, all of them were Speaker of the House, and I had never heard of any of them. And I kind of went on this little quest, you know. All the people, the great big oil paintings, I'd never heard of any of these people. And it's kind of a liberating moment for me, because I figured the work is far more important than the people that do it. And once you keep that in mind, you work hard, and you can do a lot of good things for people. They won't remember you. I hate to tell you this. We remember Abraham Lincoln. We remember George Washington. But we don't remember hardly anybody else. And that's okay. Because what I wanted to leave behind as Secretary of State was, you know, we used to do this way and it worked pretty well. That's what I wanted to leave behind. So, you know, the poll is very, very important. It keeps you coming back. You never quite get it. Isn't that right, Mr. James? Any other questions? You've got a couple more minutes. Oh, yeah, way back there.
Throughout your life, what's the hardest experience or trial you've had, and how did you get through it?
Which one? The hardest experience I've ever had, and how did I get through it? Well, you know, sometimes you don't make it through, and that's the grim reality, right? You know, the great thing about the study of history is that you have the advantage of knowing how it turned out, and a lot of times when you're in the middle of this, you don't know how it's going to turn out. And, you know, when I was first Secretary of State, we dealt with an initiative, a citizen initiative, a taxpayer bill of rights, very controversial. Democrats hated it, Republicans loved it. And under the framework at the time, there was a 1-year process to get your signatures in. They turn them in, have a big press conference, go off and celebrate. Oh, what's this under the seat of the van? Oh my, big bundle of petitions that they forgot to turn in. They turn them in the next day. Well, now they're officially late. I said, I'm not Secretary of State yet. I got elected Secretary of State, and the deadline to get them certified was the end of January. I got a call from Julie Flynn, the Deputy Secretary for Corporations, Elections, and Commissions, and she said, I hate to tell you this, but it makes a difference. If we don't count those, they don't make it on the ballot. If we count them, they make it. Okay? What's the law say? The law says we don't take them. I said, fine, don't take them. Well, maybe not so fast. You know, because the courts don't work the way the legislature does. And as we weighed that out and looked at it from that perspective, we realized it's a little bit more confusing than that. And I find is that, you know, all these attorneys, I'm not a lawyer, no self-respecting law school would even send me an application. I said, stop. What's the right thing to do? What should we do? Really, in terms of what passes a straight face test, rejecting an entire petition effort for being 5 administrative minutes late is not in keeping with the intent of the law. So we took them. And that was a long couple of months for me. You know, I knew I was in trouble, when I had to take some driver education materials to the House Republican caucus, and I walked in, I got a standing ovation. I think I won't get that if I go to the Democratic caucus. And there are Democrats who wouldn't speak to me. I get hissed at as I walk down the hall. Yeah, and this is a real guy. I mean, and we get sued by the Democratic Party. Well, the umpteenth time at that point I've been sued by the Democratic Party. And it goes to the Superior Court. The Superior Court Justice renders a decision that is actually mocking of me. He mocked me for the decision. And all the members of leadership of the legislature had their cross of gold press releases that the rule of law has been upheld. They couldn't understand what the hell was wrong with me. And I had at least 3 members of leadership already organizing campaigns to succeed me. I mean, this is real. So we look at the decision, what do we do? It's like, well, here's some holes here. Let's appeal it to the Supreme Court. Now remember, I'm living this and eating it, and sleeping it, and breathing it. And I go to the Supreme Court to listen to the oral arguments. And if you ever lose faith in government, go to the Supreme Court. I'll tell you what, those guys are good. And Justice Levy asked a question that I hadn't even thought of. He said, look, if you take away this statute about the 1-year thing, what are you left with? And the lawyer said, well, you're left with a constitutional requirement that no signature can be more than a year old, and they have to be in by the end of January. So how do you think the Supreme Court ruled? It's obvious, but here, unanimously, they said that I did the wrong thing, that I should not have accepted the late signatures under the law. I broke the law, and we knew we were taking a 2x4 to the law. But that I did the right thing, because the law itself was unconstitutional for too narrowly confining the right of people to petition their government. And that was the right thing to do. Now, how do you deal with that? Only one way, my friend. When you know you don't have any landing gear and you're flying into the mountains, if you lose your office because you're doing something you believe in, there's no better way to leave. There's no better way to leave. There's 2 kinds of people in politics. Those who eat well and those who sleep much. And I sleep pretty damn good.